Welcome back to the Modern Hippie Podcast. I am joined today by Dr. Aneel Paulus, who is a visionary physician scientist with tenure at the Mayo Clinic and a founder whose work could be boiled down to exploring the intersection of cancer, neuroscience, and psychedelic assisted therapies. Aneel has recently founded West Eastern Health, which is how our paths have crossed, as he is seeking to bridge the gap between Western and Eastern medicinal practices. So thank you so much for joining me today, Aneel.
Hey, thanks, Barrett. Thank you for all that you're doing, and glad to be able to connect.
Yeah. So those three things that have intersected there, the cancer, neuroscience, and my personal favorite, psychedelic assisted therapies, is quite a combination. How did your journey get started? Let's begin with how did you get into becoming a doctor? What inspired you down that path?
Yeah, so the background I could say is that I come from a family of physicians and surgeons. So I think some of that foundational early exposure was already there. Um, but at some point, I kind of ran from that and was like, I don't know if I want to do that. Let me explore the things. I spent some time kind of looking at different computer science and neuroscience and a lot of different fields. But ultimately, I ended up back in medicine. It just came naturally to me. I was curious, um, very familiar with it already. And with oncology, as a child, even I was always really into sci-fi and tech and aliens and UFOs and uh, you can take. I could tell from a serious perspective and go down that kind of pathway as to what really inspired me from from a medical training perspective and interacting with patients. But in at the root and core of it, I came to view cancer really as like this alien, from within,
Mhm.
and from this very like sci-fi perspective. This is an enemy that really had to be defeated with all of the technology and kind of things that we had at our disposal. And so for me, as I moved through and came to learn one medical discipline after another and trained in these things, I really settled on cancer as something that I wanted to take on that challenge. I kept seeing the statistics, and as you interact more and more with patients during training, I got to see that this was still such an unmet need and a huge challenge, and we really just didn't have a good way to go about it. And so for me, that's really what inspired me to take on that challenge to figure out any kind of treatment, the best possible treatment. So I was super optimistic, and fast forward 10 years, I can say like, wow, what a journey, what a ride, what the amazing kinds of advances that we've seen in oncology as far as extension of the overall survival and lifespan of some of our patients.
Now, did you see Eastern medicines begin to kind of mix and intermingle with how oncology patients are being treated, cancer patients are being treated?
Yeah, interesting question, and I'll answer that going back almost 12 years. So when I was in training at Roswell Park Cancer Institute up in Buffalo, New York, I was working under a very gifted, tremendous, visionary mentor, actually, who had a patient, and this patient essentially came. He had what I would classify as a low-grade leukemia, blood cancer, and said, hey, listen, I want to try something alternative. My wife has got me on two or three different kinds of supplements now, and I really want to give them a shot. And what we decided was that, okay, your leukemia is early on enough that we can kind of track it and monitor it. And okay, in a month or so, if your counts start going up, you got to go with what we're recommending.
Mm.
And sure enough, he comes back 3 months later and his leukemia is gone. And
Whoa.
I'm perplexed. I've never seen anything like this, and neither has anybody from the team. So everybody's scratching their head, like, wait, what happened? What just happened here? And so we asked him to bring his meds in, and there's these supplements, and we're like, okay, let's systematically now try and figure out what's what. So let's take him off supplement one, and then monitor his counts. And if his leukemia comes back, we know that's the one. So we take him off
Mm.
supplement one. His count's still kind of going up, and not coming down. So that can't be it. Take him off supplement two, same thing. It's a third supplement. Then we take him off, and sure enough, his leukemia counts start going back up because now he's not on that medicine. So
Mhm.
now we know, okay, like the moment that, we take him off this medicine, this supplement, um, his leukemia counts start going back up. We put him back on, and boom, all of a sudden we see this downward trend again. So clearly that was it. And it turned out to be an a really well-known herbal herb from the east known as neem leaf
Mm.
extract, really. So the extract from leaves. And fast forward, really, we spent years dissecting out how this worked as a medicine. And it's a very complex series, composition of phytochemicals. We approached the FDA, and they wanted us to get all this information that nobody was willing to be able to help us get, because they're like, well, listen, the moment you involve the FDA, it's certain rules and regulations that you come under, and none of the Neem suppliers that we went to wanted to do that. So what we realized after creating a bunch of derivatives from it and trying to replicate the effects was that, number one, Neem really works, and now there's about 30 or 40 other patients over the span of the last 10 years that now we've documented have benefited from Neem. Not in the same manner as that patient, but again, varying degrees depending on how aggressive the cancer was. The second thing we learned was that you don't mess with something sometimes when it's working really well. We tried to create a derivative out of it because that's the way the NIH and pharma really likes things nice, clean,
Mhm.
predictable. Um, and we realized that, yeah, it kills the cancer cells, the derivative compound that we created, but also kills the liver. So
Mm.
can't give that. Can't really do much with that, right? But the neem was so well tolerated, a couple grams a day, 1 gram starting off, and then working way up to 2 grams. Really well tolerated, a little bit of GI discomfort. That to me was my first real lesson, and I would say interest, where I said, okay, you know what? There's much more to the traditional kind of uh, Western style of medicine, pharma derived kind of toolkit that I'm used to working with, just having trained as an MD in the Western system. And there's a whole other system of medicines, of thought, of philosophy, of wisdom, right? That
Mhm.
really comes from where I come from, really, the East. And I somehow have just completely shut that off. And I felt sorry for myself one day. I was like, how did I end up here, where I've come to regard a pill as a medicine and a plant as a drug, or a plant as
Mm.
something that shouldn't be consumed. It really was just like it really was like a light bulb went off. And that, in a nutshell, and we could dive into that any which way you want, was my real big lesson in life, that there is so much to be learned from all of these different cultures and styles of medicine, or styles of healing, that you can't just try and box yourself into one little compartment here. You got to be able to figure out how to plug and play and utilize all of these other modalities.
Hmm. I love that realization. I've used neem oil myself in different products I've created for the body, so I'm a little familiar with it. And I think that's just like perfect story around really getting to understand that, like, just as you said, that the pill that we take that we think is the solution that was created in a lab, that was a derivative compound from a plant, right? Everything that's created in a pharmaceutical derived originally from some sort of occurrence in nature, from as I like to think, and is backed up and shown now, plants have an intelligence to them. And it's like when you begin to separate off that compound from the actual plant, the actual extraction of that oil, for instance, you don't get the full benefits. Like you'd mentioned, it started to destroy people's livers, but somehow in actual all plant form, it was much more tolerable.
Yeah.
Um, Gosh, what a powerful testament. And
Yeah.
so what did you begin to explore from there? Did you go and study at all any like Ayurveda or Eastern practices?
I didn't go into studying in any formal sense such practices, but I was much more open to them. For me, I think that the style of medicine, what you're trained as, and then the academic environment, really, it's a very harsh, cynical kind of environment, and everybody likes to believe their idea is the best. Their way
Mm.
of thought is the only way of thought, and in some, really, it sounds really odd. And again, just being in that industry, you learn, like, nobody's really there I shouldn't say nobody. There's much more politics involved in trying to promote your own ideas, your own thought, your own philosophy, that then undermines everybody else's. So being in that system, I was so closed off. I was just not open to any other um, practice, any other understanding of the human body, the mind, the consciousness, spirituality. Um, that was something that but it was bubbling. It was always kind of like churning in my stomach. It was always like this unease and this kind of discomfort, right? Like, wait a second, this can't be it. This is not all it. There's more. There's more. And I think for me, the big kind of breakthrough was when I experienced a certain psychedelic medicine for myself, and it just kind of blew the doors open in terms of what I realized could be possible, right? And the fact that, wait a second, there are practices of meditation that are really effective, and it's not all just mumbo jumbo or woo woo. Prayer can be extremely effective, and it
Mhm.
has been in my life, right? So with the distinction I'll make, people think meditation prayer is the same. Meditation for me is looking inward and really kind of spending time inward and being focused on my internal kind of state, and then prayer is just reaching outward, right?
Mhm.
With everything that I have to say, okay, well, maybe I don't understand everything, but I know there's intelligence in the universe, is God. There's things that I can learn and I can receive. So these are things that I was never really fully open to. So to answer your question, I think I became much more open, started to kind of do my own research into like, okay, well, is there any data, right? I'm a data guy. Is there any science behind meditation or breath work or prayer? And it was remarkable for me to see that there was, it's a burgeoning kind of field.
Mhm.
And yet people are looking into what happens at a physiological level, at a biochemical level, when somebody meditates or somebody experiences a breath work or when somebody prays. So uh, that's kind of where I started kind of swimming. I started looking at other forms of, plants, curcumin for one. A lot of potent anti-inflammatory activity, anti-cancer activity. There's unique challenges to all this. I would advise that, don't just go out and buy a bunch of curcumin or neem and start ingesting it. There's a reason why, that they haven't exactly made it into the news as blockbuster anti-cancer drugs. There's variation from person to person, absorption issues, a lot of things that one has to kind of tinker with. But that's really where I think for me now I'm just open. Now I would say I am a modern hippie in some ways.
That's why you're here.
Yeah, yeah. I hope that answers your question.
Oh, yeah, absolutely, and it's just you're like exactly the kind of oncologist I feel like everyone would want, someone who's willing to look at, "Okay, well, what if we try this one Western way and it's not well, what is the Eastern way that we could go?" And, I heard from someone recently that, like, cancer cells are real they're actually giving a homage to cancer cells because they are cells that have energetically been cut off from connecting with the rest of the cells of the body, and they believe that they're the last one, and so it is just their duty to try and replicate, replicate, replicate. And in a sense, there's something almost romantic about that, and that like the lone last cell just trying to replicate and recreate the human body. And it before we started recording, you and I were talking a little bit about community, and it's like does the sorry, I just dropped my crystal. And we were talking about community, and it's almost like the cancer cell needs to be reintegrated to the community in order to stop its reproduction, reproduction, reproduction.
Yeah, I that resonates with me, and there's a few different ways we could explore that. Um, so one aspect of that is something a little bit more esoteric and uh, beyond maybe my scope, but I could just say that it's something I think about, right? I mean, from an energetic perspective, and energy, I didn't quite understand when people would say, "Oh, I don't like this person's energy," or "Your energy is low." Like to me, it was not something I could grasp. But if I was to reframe it, and maybe for some of the folks that are listening from a medical background or struggle with these same concepts, it's a language thing actually. And the way I was able to reframe it is that your body your brain and your heart function and generate millivolts of electricity. They're so efficient actually on how little energy they use in terms of the equivalent of the compute power or the function, right, of that organ. And when I started to think about it that way, that wait a second, there's energy in every single cell. ATP is nothing but energy, right? And it's a reaction essentially between different chemicals that generates ATP. So okay, so now we've got energy, and then maybe it just flows a certain way. Maybe it flows into different aspects of the body and at different times and in different ways to different cells that we just haven't figured out yet, right? And if even if I can't measure it, doesn't mean it doesn't exist. That was one of the biggest realizations I had. Maybe I don't have the tools yet. They're not sensitive enough yet. So yeah, there's this thread that we can go down that perhaps there are cancer cells that are linked together with a particular energy pattern, and they're disconnected from the energy of the body that maintains homeostasis. There's another way that we can look at this, and there's brilliant work being done by I'm blanking on his name. He's a scientist at the Weiss Institute for Biologically Inspired Technology. And that's to figure out a way that can you actually, without necessarily killing off the cancer cell, and recognizing it in this almost in this compassionate way that you did, right? You framed it in such a compassionate way that this is like the lone survivor. It just doesn't know what it's doing. It thinks it's the last one. And all it wants to do is divide, 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 and it becomes more and more dysfunctional in how it thinks. Well, what if like you could retrain it? We could re-educate it and allow it to realize, like, wait a second, no. There's a whole community of cells that you must live within. You must harmonize with them. There's a larger goal, a larger function of this organism that we call Aneel or Barrett. And what the science is kind of like looking at is, can you actually program certain cells to kind of go in there and re-educate this cancer cell so that it goes back almost into this state where it is normal, quote unquote. Every cancer cell has a normal state that it comes out of, and a lot of times it's like these very immature, undifferentiated cells that during their lifespan, they got stuck like from here to here. They never fully went that whole route. So, for example, the cancers that I deal with, they're B cells, and B cells are your immune cells. They do a variety of things like secrete antibodies, but they have a process of how they mature into finally becoming this cell that secretes antibody and that can perform immune surveillance functions. And it's actually a very intricate, very beautiful process that involves different stages, different places that these cells go, different interactions that they have with T cells. I mean, it's beautiful actually. And somewhere along the way, this poor little B cell gets stuck in this stage, and then it just never fully matures off into that cell that it was destined to be. And so the thought is that can you get it to like just say, hey, look, we don't have to be in this stage constantly and just keep dividing into this immature B cell subset, right? We must go through this process now to become what we're supposed to be and be this healthy, normal antibody secreting B cell. So I think that's the way I look at it.
I love that. It's like a B cell on the hero's journey.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's just like gotten stuck at the epicenter, at the point where everything begins to collapse. And so it's just replicating.
Yeah.
And what kind of cells do you send at that? Is that something then like stem cells that are completely programmable to do that?
Yeah. So it's still a very, very emerging field. Nothing clinical has come out of it. But I will say this is that we have a model to some extent that clinically we've seen this work. And again, it's another kind of leukemia that when we were able to give this what I mean is actually a chemo, kind of a drug. When we're able to give this drug, all of a sudden the cell starts to mature and it starts to kind of go out of that phase of being a cancer and becomes exactly the destiny of that cell, right? There's many types of immune cells that we have, and it's not a B cell, it's a myeloid cell, but it becomes like, again, this cell that it's supposed to be. And so we've learned a thing or two in the last 20 years from that particular cancer. If you give this drug, you can almost cure everybody with that particular leukemia. And so it's the same kind of strategy that we're looking at, that can you utilize a medicine? Can you utilize something that decreases, some cancers are very inflammatory driven. So can you decrease inflammation? there's other cells that are secreting a ton of other inflammatory compounds in the body. So can you do that? Getting more into the technology aspects, there's other hybrid types of cells that are being developed by this researcher at the Weiss Institute that are looking at like, okay, can you throw this cell in there, and then its job is to help realign in this kind of swarm intelligence. There's a lot of AI and different kinds of technologies involved in that. So that's one strategy that's being looked at. Another way that I would say is that again, retraining the immune system altogether. There's exosome therapies that are being looked at. I was working on a particular exosome slash vaccine-like compound that can you educate the T cells where they can then kind of go in and start interacting with these other cells to basically control the cancer and maybe just quiet it down. And so, at some point, it just kind of fades away, and instead, there's this healthy population of B cells that starts to kind of come up. So there's a variety of ways, but we don't have anything yet in my field as far as the leukemias that I've historically dealt with to say that that's the case just yet.
Okay. Well, and beginning to bring in some of the throughway of the psychedelics that I'm so in love with. Have you seen anything promising on your front related to the THC in marijuana, the CBD in marijuana? What have you seen kind of come through the gates?
So I don't have much personal experience with THC or CBD. I think they're different class of compounds that many people smarter than me are doing research on. Um, but what I can share is that I can see more and more the medicinal value of I mean the THC having one particular purpose, CBD having another, and then the ratios and combinations of these two having very different effects in terms of, again, anti-inflammatory effects. Cancer, for a majority of individuals at a base level, is very much driven by inflammation, chronic inflammation in the body.
Mm.
And so I think some of these compounds, again, to whatever I know and whatever I can speak, THC, CBD specifically, that they have these anxiolytic, anti-inflammatory like effects, so that maybe that's something that helps. But personally, I don't know. I don't have much experience with them from a clinical or basic science perspective.
That's okay. What have you been seeing come through the pipeline that kind of is beginning to like prove these Eastern techniques in our Western field?
Yeah, that's a great question, Barrett. There's a lot of work being done and pioneered really at places like Stanford and even Hopkins, and that are starting to see, okay, the Eastern medicines a lot of times, they rely on certain herbal concoctions. They rely on a lot of techniques that invoke a person's consciousness really,
Mhm.
and their mind, their spirit. So I think what I'm excited about and starting to see the data, it, I will tie it into, again, for me, which is a field that I would say is called cancer neuroscience. And what that really means is that, okay, how is cancer related and fed by the brain, by the mind? And what some of the data that I'm starting to see, really early data, is that, okay, how does a technique with no pharmaceuticals or any pharmacologic modality like breath work or meditation, what that does to the brain, and then what that correlation is with the physiologic kind of parameters that we look at, like cortisol or different neurotransmitters, different markers of inflammation. And now I think the work is getting into single cell analysis at the genomic level of, okay, what are the cells that you start seeing during these transient periods. Um, so what I'm seeing, and if I can kind of summarize a little bit, is that the technology that we've developed and it's been applied traditionally to the pharmaceutical realm, because a lot of these technologies are born out of that. The need to be able to analyze and to be able to kind of create something that's so hyper optimized and so like directed towards one purpose. Those same tools, those same technologies now, I'm so excited to see that people are utilizing to be able to study people that are employing these kinds of other techniques, that are not pharmaceutical in nature. And even again, the herbal concoctions that I was mentioning, again, the challenge with herbal concoctions is that they're a concoction, right? So Neem, for example, Neem has 400 different phytochemicals. And how do you know which one is really doing what half the time? And my kind of, where I landed eventually was is that, yeah, there's three or four that we identified that are really the ones hitting the cancer and really toxic in general. It's probably the other 390 something that are buffering the effects or being able to kind of help the body digest and kind of figure out, okay, how do we take this medicine in? So that's what I'm seeing. That's what I'm excited about. That um, we're able to do this kind of research. There's studies that we can design and be able to test out different hypotheses that don't always involve a pharmaceutical grade agent of some kind, but maybe other modalities. Um, and particularly in the field of psychedelic science, it's really starting to kind of take off from there too.
Yes, yes, it
Yeah,
is, and I love how you just identified that, like, there may be less than a handful of chemicals within Neem, for example, that are hard on the body, but the other ones are there to soften the blow,
yeah,
and that's just like nature's divine intelligence. That is sacred world looking out for us, like, "Here, you need this medicine, and I'm going to give it to you in a way in which you can tolerate it."
yeah. It's beautiful. It really is.
Have you gotten into any of the other sort of modalities? Like I've heard great effects of water fasting with regards to cancer, cold plunging. And in my head, as you've been talking about it, I'm hearing a lot that one of the common threads of those practices is that they reduce inflammation in the body.
Yeah. So diet and fasting in general. So they're a little bit more complicated and nuanced when it comes to cancer. Certain cancer cells, as we've started to kind of do metabolomic studies, which basically means, okay, what is the energy requirements of a particular cell, right? So we have ways to assess that. Like, is it being driven more by something that is sugar driven, let's say, or something that is a
Mm.
fat intermediate of some kind, or something else completely, right? Like, cancer cells are very, very efficient and very clever, so to say, that they can figure out, and they will evolve quickly. Like the way it replicates, it'll find a mutation or a particular um, loss of a protein or gain of a protein, or one little tweak here, one little tweak there, that allows it to survive and then follow that pathway down, and keep replicating. So you have this kind of cancer is really a collection of different kinds of clones. The way that, and I don't want to digress too far down this road, but the way I just to help your audience kind of reframe cancer a little bit for them. It's a really old movie. It's a Michael Keaton movie. Michael Keaton, for many people who don't know, was the first Batman. So Michael Keaton made a movie called Multiplicity.
Mm.
And Multiplicity was this movie where he figures out, he's a super smart, scientist, and he's like, I'm working so hard, but what if I could create a clone of me that could do half the work, and then I can enjoy my life? So he figures out how to clone himself, and now he creates a clone. Now this guy's, pretty smart, and he's like, oh wow, okay. And for a little while, he takes orders from the original Michael Keaton. So clone one now is like, he's having all the fun there. Why don't I clone myself? And now I can go on and have some fun too. And so he does that. Now, this keeps happening, and every single time that each clone clones itself, they get a little dumber. They get a little bit more deranged, and they're not as smart. They're a little quirky. Now, at some point, they're just downright like, completely dysfunctional.
Mhm.
But they figured out how to keep replicating in some way, and so that power is there within a cancer cell, but it becomes so deranged in some ways that it just figures out, like, okay, how do I replicate, and at some point it gets into this pathway where if you can predict that, you can figure out the energy requirements, right, from tracking methods that we have now, really sophisticated methods, to be able to map out the trajectory in time, the kinetics really of how a cancer clone evolved, the different clones in that person's tumor. So it's not just one cancer, it's a collection of many, many little cancer cells that are slightly different. They look a little different from one another. They're all, again, leukemia, but they're not all the same in terms of, again, that clone multiplicity analogy. So coming back to the water fasting, coming back to the cold plunging, I think what I could say about that is that there are certain types of fasts that we're still figuring out can work for cancer. I would advise that to do a little bit more research, consult with your doctor, consult with somebody at our clinic, that can guide you on this. We are developing protocols, and we have some experience with that. Um, because not every cancer is going to respond to a water fast. You may make it worse, or a 4 day fast, right? There's people that are like, well, if I do a 4 or 5 day fast, it'll starve the cancer cells. Maybe, but we can figure that out together, right? So that's what I would say about that. As far as the cold plunging, any other activities that really reduce inflammation, and inflammation is from a myriad, sources. It could be diet, it could be lack of sleep, it could be stress. That can cause inflammation, chronic inflammation.
Mm.
I think if you can kind of figure out, like, okay, what is the person that you're interacting with, out of these kind of 3 or 4 pillars of health, like sleep, diet, nutrition, um, uh, chronic stress management, so to say, like, are they struggling with one of these other three, and then that's leading to their stressful lifestyle, or no, they've got the other three in check, and it's something else. And there's panels of tests that we can run to kind of see what level of inflammation you have. Um, that's where I would say that some of these modalities, like cold plunging, and many others. There's a ton of ways to look at this. Rapamycin is emerging as a potent anti-inflammatory with health extension benefits, something that I've started to take as well, just based off the data. I think that is a better way to approach it, to kind of figure out what the cause potentially for the inflammation is, and then try and target it in a way, or reduce it in a way that may involve cold plunging. It may involve another medicine. It may involve something or another, rather than just saying I'm just going to do them all and just kind of see and hope that my inflammation goes down. That's the way I approach it, a little bit more systematically.
Well, and you are the doctor, so a systematic approach makes tons of sense. And I love that approach. Like, everyone is different, and beginning to figure out where are they balanced, where are they out of balance. Something I noticed for myself personally when I went gluten free, I just tested it for 30 days. I was like, let me see. And people are like, well, do you have celiac? Are you allergic? And I got tested. I was like, okay, I'm not allergic. I don't have celiac. But what I noticed in my body was that I inherently felt better. And I'd kind of been chasing this idea my whole life of what would it be like to wake up and feel good, to feel good every day, to feel rested. And I didn't experience that until the last like year and a half of my life. And now I'm like, okay, really honed in on what are the things that are allowing me to wake up and feel good in the morning and to feel good throughout the day. And so even what may cause inflammation for me with gluten may not cause the same inflammation for someone else. And that's okay. We're all different.
Yeah, yeah, agree.
And so where did your journey now begin with psychedelics? How did that get into the mix?
I've always been curious about psychedelics, and really, I think it stems more from a fascination with consciousness. I remember being in seventh grade, sixth grade, and having a book by it was a Daniel Dennett book, and it was all on consciousness. Heavy reading for a sixth grader, uh, but it really, I think for me, it started that young, and also just from a personal family kind of perspective, where I had an uncle who, a brilliant man, and ended up with schizophrenia. Now, I mean, I didn't understand anything about schizophrenia, but I saw what it did to him and my family. And so for me, neuroscience, the brain, the mind, has always been something that I have been passionate about, and have always kind of kept abreast of, in terms of things being done. Psychedelics for me really started to emerge later on in life. Um, some degree of college, and then medical school, and then beyond, very, very sporadically here and there, exposure to psychedelics, or coming to understand them as a way to really gain insight. But never anything like, oh yeah, I really want to now explore this. Full circle, it wasn't until a couple of years ago where I was just I was burned out.
Mm.
The academic system is, you publish or perish. You either get, you either produce as many publications as you can, and you get enough grants, and that's really what it is. And remarkably, I will say that I actually tried, after many, many years, of never using a psychedelic, I found my way to to microdosing LSD for a few weeks, and I saw what it did in terms of enhancing my ability to perform cognitively and creatively, right? So that was kind of where finally I was like, okay, there's something here. I'm not sure what it is. Let me just keep learning and kind of just staying in touch with the field, so to say, the science of it. Um, but I will say, for me, the transformational medicine was Bufo. Uh, that was really something that, like as I mentioned, it just blew the doors open, and I was able to experience a kind of um, healing, I'll say, and widespread changes in my body. I felt lighter. I felt more nimble. I felt more like a weight had been lifted off my shoulders. My back pain went away. I was able to lose like 20 pounds in like under a couple weeks. Just
Wow.
really focusing on diet, nutrition, exercise. Like nothing crazy, but just it just felt like the weight just kind of shut off. It was remarkable. I was able to absorb and learn new material at a pace that I was not able to do before. Had this clarity and this focus that I couldn't explain really. So
Mm.
for me, and I was like, wow, this is something I have to figure out. I got to figure out what this is and how to be able to bring this to people that can benefit from this, especially patients with cancer. So for me, that was really the kind of galvanizing point where I went ahead and I said, okay, let's create something from this. Let's see how what we can do and at least start the journey on being able to create a platform, being able to create a physical space, a clinic, um, and the infrastructure, so to say, and best practice to be able to incorporate something so profound that I don't have words for what I experienced, other than to kind of summarize the downstream effects that I experienced, for several weeks to months. And yet I know that it was something so metaphysical. I can't put it into science terms, so to say. So I classify that now as more on the holistic side, right? So how do I take what I gained, that embodiment of knowledge, I'll call it, what I left with, and then be able to create some kind of a system to be able to offer that to people, if not yet. 5-MeO DMT or Bufo is not available yet. It is being looked at in clinical trials. I was cavalier enough to try it on my own, with wonderful support, but so right now I will say that there's a lot of work that still needs to be done on it. But there's potential, there's hope, there's so much promise to such medicines. So I hope that kind of answers your question as to where am I right now with psychedelics. Um, but yeah, we can explore that more if you want.
Yeah, yes, what a beautiful journey you've had with the medicines and, or for your Bufo journey specifically, what maybe could be explained even a little bit further, whether you're aware of what happened or whether my listeners are a little unaware of what happened, but that Bufo, especially because it sounds like you smoked the natural medicine,
I did.
the Bufo has the toxins and all of the additional intelligence of the toad. Bufo is a toad venom. And so in that, it is just so powerful, like getting in the body, opening those energy channels, which is probably why your back hurt or why you felt lighter. When not why your back hurt, but why your back stopped hurting, right? You had an emotional block there or even a whole chakra center blocked. And so that opens up and it begins to like really help you hone in and connect to your soul's purpose. So you get that like laser focus then on what you want to be doing with your life as well as the extra connectivity of that. Like, I remember when I smoked Bufo for the first time, I actually got, like, a moistness to my skin that I just could only attribute to, like, the slime of the toad, and I would get all these visions and this deeper connected sense to the earth because they burrow under the earth for 9 months at a time. Um, and so it's just like a really incredible medicine that I agree. I hope many more people gain access to, and certainly there's a lot of facilitators serving it both underground in America as well as outside of the states legally, if that's something that people desire to explore. And and these psychedelic medicines, they're so intelligent and they get in there and they help you realize how to live almost a healthier life. That's probably why the weight shed off you so much more readily because it felt easy to make the healthy decisions.
Yeah, you're right. There's a certain level of intelligence that I had after that. I think where it led me was that, as I mentioned, I was at this point in my career where I came to this realization that, okay, um, there is value to developing these medicines, within the framework that I'm doing, understanding cancer and trying to create therapies for it. But at the end of the day, a lot of it is putting a band-aid
Mm.
on the cancer or on the ailment, let's say, right? You're never really able to get to the root of it, let's say. So it led me down this kind of path, which was already, I could see it now full circle, but there was multiple streams of thought, interactions, engagements with, person from the aging science community, another person from the holistic community, somebody completely not into medicine at all, but more into health and fitness, with some understanding of the human body. All of these interactions led me down this path where after the Bufo, it was very clear to me that, okay, if I'm going to take on cancer now in this next phase of my life, then it has to be from a completely different vantage point. It has to be with a completely different lens. And that lens that I kept coming back to intuitively was, you're trying to chase after the last cell with all these different tests, right? And the cancer's always one step ahead. It's one step ahead because your tests aren't good enough yet. And it's just so far gone that it's more and more challenging. It's like an uphill battle. Why not go after the first cell? Why not try and figure out what how do you prevent that first cell from ever becoming into what is a clinical entity, right? Where there's now millions of cells of cancer. So catch the first cell and figure out how to prevent that first cell from even forming, right? Cancer happens in all of our bodies, but the clinical diagnosis is not, because your immune system is able to keep it in check, low level of inflammation. There's ways that the body protects itself from development of cancer. So let's figure out a way to prevent it. So it really, for me, started to go down this pathway of, okay, now that I've seen the benefits for me in shedding off that weight, cutting off social media for some time, really
Mm.
becoming laser focused and eating healthy, I've seen what it's done for my own health, and all of this is linked to the same changes that can be made in a person who has a family history of cancer or a particular risk factor for cancer. So what I'm getting at is that now I think this next series of projects that I'm involved in, and we can dive into that in a different podcast, it's much more focused on cancer prevention, right? And slowing down the aging process, so to say. Age is actually the single greatest risk factor for cancer outside of childhood cancers. There are different etiology, there's a different mechanism of how they form. But for majority of people, the longer you live, the higher your chances are of having cancer. So if you look at it from that point, all these different things we're talking about, right? These are ways to help slow down that process of aging to some extent, reduce inflammation, and really be able to be more intentional with what we think and how we think, which again does feed into the way our body responds to certain threats, to cancer, to viruses, all of this stuff. Uh, that's really where I think that particular medicine helped me now focus to say, okay, we're going after cancer. We're going to figure out how to prevent it from happening in the first place. We're going to use every tool in the armamentarium that we have on the western kind of side of medicine, the eastern side of medicine, and be able to engage the mind by techniques of neuromodulation, or whether it's pharmacologic with psychedelics, or non-pharmacologic with a lot of interesting techniques that use vibroacoustic or sound, light, a lot of cool things that we can start looking at.
I'm so into frequency and sound, and that pertains to like sound frequency. Then as it crosses over into light frequency, what is one of the studies that might be freshest in your mind at the moment of that sort of therapy being effective?
Good question. I'm actually in the middle of embarking on such a study myself, because I wasn't able to glean. I wasn't satisfied with the way the study was done. That's again the analytical component of me. I have to understand. Okay, how did you do it? And the conclusions of the study validate really what the hypothesis was. But what I can say is this: is that there is preliminary evidence, preliminary data, and that's a term that means that there is something there. It looks promising. Now let's start to kind of unravel that thread a little bit, right? Let's keep going down the rabbit hole a little deeper. There's work being done at MIT and a few other places that are looking at particular frequencies of sound and music in general. That then, okay, can we play music at a particular frequency that at least influences a certain brainwave pattern, which we can then correlate to say this is a parasympathetic, sympathetic, response, or response you see when there's generally a state of calm in the body. These, I believe, these same researchers are going to be looking at markers in the blood and to kind of see like, okay, does this particular sound, when heard by the brain, induce this particular wave EEG wave pattern, have put the brain in a particular state, and then downstream has this very potent effect where there's like just again, I use anti-inflammatory as a surrogate to say there's widespread changes in the body that can correlate with a state of health, let's say.
Mm.
So another way I could address or answer this question is that there are some studies to show, at least in vitro. In vitro just means in petri dishes and in a lab, that particular frequencies of sound can disrupt the way a cancer cell associates with itself, and forms a clump or a cluster, and then begins to divide and divide, and then metastasizes. Right? People have heard the term metastasis, where it then spreads off in a different part of the body. There are certain frequencies of sound or certain ways to induce breaking up those cells, so to say. And the hope and the promise is that if you're able to do that, well, then they're more susceptible to dying. Cancer cells do like to clump together sometimes to survive. But if you can break them up, and get them kind of free floating a little bit, immune cells can come and gobble them up, or again they're just become a little discombobulated and they'll die off. So that to me was promising, and it's something intuitive, right? Like you already kind of have a sense about this, that there is something to the way that physical sound, and I would even now say that there's brilliant research being done in Australia looking at different forces, gravitational forces. Um, there's a whole lot of physics involved with like, okay, if you can induce a certain kind of gravitational force or a pull, or using magnets or other modalities, that creates different kinds of structures within the cell that they can either divide or they can die, or they can induce stem cells from to kind of start populating again. I don't want to go too far down this, but I saw this brilliant paper a couple of years ago by a researcher that basically took different shapes, exposed them to different gravitational forces. So it was like a triangle or a circle or a cross, or some other random shape, or a spiral, like a Fibonacci sequence spiral that you would see in like a seashell.
Ooh.
And he plated the cells a certain way and then exposed them to different stimuli. And then the readout was the number of stem cells that formed. And to my surprise, and pleasant surprise, but also like something intuitive, was like, I bet you that Fibonacci sequence spiral that is so readily found in nature is probably the one that is somehow going to invoke the most stem cells forming, and that's exactly what it was.
Wow.
So to me, it just created, again, it reinforced to me, Barrett, that even if I don't have necessarily all of the hard data just yet, to be able to say, hey Barrett, go look at this study, and this is exactly what it found on sound and cancer cells. I can say to some extent with confidence that there are people like me and many others that are now really taking a hard look and applying all of the resources, technologies, compute power, with AI and everything, to say, listen, there's something there. There's something there. Don't ignore it. Don't just say, oh, this is all woo woo. There's something there. Get to the bottom of it, and you may be pleasantly surprised with what you find, even if it's not cancer, or if it's maybe one subset of cancer that responds to a particular frequency of sound, like 44 hertz or something of that nature. Then at least we've figured that out. But be open, be curious. That's what I would say to anybody listening out there. That's like, no, we don't buy into any of that stuff. No, be open.
Be open. Absolutely. To me, it's reminiscent of the ancient Egyptians. They had these healing chambers in the pyramids, and it's starting to emerge that may be what the pyramids were actually truly built for, these giant healing centers. Because when people go into the rooms and they have the remembrance to activate certain sounds within this, like portals kind of open up for this healing, and the sounds that come through are truly evolutionary for the bodies that are inside. And there's different techniques such as toning, which is the act of making different tones sounds at different pitches, and one person can both tone for another person's body to scan through and bring that healing sound to them, or for even their own body. as well as, I got into tuning forks probably 5, 6 years ago, and just am obsessed with the different frequencies that we can use to bring a state of equilibrium for starters to the body. And I'm familiar with a study that's kind of gone through and calculated the different frequencies for the different organs in the body. They've recorded them at a healthy frequency, and then watched as that a particular organ may have gotten out in disharmony and in disease, and then have been able to play back the harmonious frequency to it and bring it back into a harmonious state. And
Wow.
yeah, but they are finding that that frequency is kind of unique to each person, which makes it a little bit
A little
more
more challenging to
challenging.
study. Yeah. Yeah, I think my philosophy is now that there's so many different tools that one can employ, as a practitioner or as somebody in the healing arts, or um, just compassion for another human being, and you may know something that may be able to help them. Let's lay all of them out. And for cancer particularly, I will say that while going back to Neem, um, while it was working. But the moment that somebody started to relapse, we had to consider our kind of standard toolkit. Um, so my philosophy is that don't necessarily come off of don't completely put aside the recommendations of a physician telling you, like, listen, this is a medicine, a drug, an immunotherapy, something that's a little bit more not not chemo, right?
Mhm.
That's really, we have hard data for, to say this is going to work in, like, 90+% of patients. Yes, but then I would also say that, what, have that discussion with your doctor and say, listen, would you mind if I did a fast? Okay, let's look at it. Your doctor, by this point in this 2024, I would say that most physicians, if not, they should be familiar with integrative medicine, or holistic medicine, or some kind of supplements and herbs that most people take. Or, and the point I was getting at is that, if have that discussion, that should I go on this supplement? What will the supplement do to me? What would Neem do to me? What would curcumin do to me? What would St. John's wort? How do these interact? And then even so far as say, well, what would a psychedelic medicine do? What would breath work do? Am I going to be harming myself, hurting myself? I think this is a time now where us as physicians and practitioners and scientists and people with medical knowledge or scientific knowledge really need to um, be open. And I've kind of come up with this new way of explaining this. I was explaining this to my nephew. It's a great quote by F. Scott Fitzgerald that basically, I'll paraphrase, that the mark of first-rate intelligence is being able to hold two opposing views at the same time. And I almost analogize it to him. He's really into quantum physics and stuff. That there's something called a superposition of a molecule, of an atom, right? Where it can be negative and positive, or in quantum computing, it can be a zero and a one at the same time. It doesn't have to be a zero or a one. It can be zero and one. That's how quantum computers got to work. And so for me, I'm very kind of now aware that, okay, I won't dismiss something just because I don't know anything about it, or I'm not familiar with it. And what I would say again to any practitioners out there is that, listen, dive in, understand what breathwork is. There's a lot of work now being done on how simple, kind of alteration of nitrogen, carbon dioxide, oxygen, blood gases, right? And the receptors that they interact with the brain can have these very, very tremendous medically kind of classifiable and beneficial effects. So that's kind of where I'm at. Where, like, yes, you have all these modalities. Let's put them all on the table. Let's see the evidence for each one of these, and let's prioritize. One, two, three. You're going to go on this. Plus, you can have breathwork. Plus, you can have something. But yeah, let's figure it all out.
I love that approach, and I feel like that really leads into what you're doing now with West Eastern Health. Tell me what inspired you to create West Eastern Health, and what are your goals there?
Yeah. My inspiration really was a particular individual who was touched by cancer. Really, really was just suffering, from thoughts of suicide, and just down a really deep, dark path. And I had just recently had my Bufo experience within that year. I was already kind of like thinking of cancer, and how to like prevent it. And for me, it really touched on the fact that, okay, I was exploring options again for this individual for their mental health, and I was just shocked to see what little resources and what there was for this individual suffering from the burden of cancer. And the depression and anxiety you have with cancer is very different. It's unique. The contours of it are completely different from somebody who is not facing a life-threatening illness. So, yeah, this individual, as well as a dear family member of mine who, who is, himself a physician, suffering from this, seeing them, it really inspired me to say, okay, if if now I'm going down this path of really opening the box and saying what is out there that maybe I haven't learned or I haven't been taught about, um, but intuitively maybe I'm being guided to this. Let's open that book up. Let's see exactly what's out there. And what again I came across is that yes, there, you have this Western style of medicine that's being practiced with this Eastern style of medicine. Can the two be combined? Can we take the rigor, the protocols, the transparency to some extent, the system of kind of checks and balances and accountability, right? That's what I kind of equate with Western medicine, um, where everything is protocols, everything is down to like a science, so to say, and be able to take some of that and be able to apply that now with Eastern medicine, right? Or be able to apply some of those tools and techniques to Eastern medicine. And that was really the genesis of West Eastern, where I said, okay, let's merge these two. Let's finally create a platform and a space for dialogue, right, between people that are that are MD PhDs that have never even considered, what any of these other things on this side are, and have a mistrust of people on this side. And similarly, people that are on the holistic side of the fence are like, I will never go to a person with a white lab coat. They scare me. I've had bad experiences, or that's happened. And be able to say, look, not everybody is like that, and there's a lot of value and a lot of benefit. That if your finger gets cut off, I'm not going to a energy healer. I'm going to go to a surgeon. Or if
Yep.
I have cancer, I want to get a full kind of picture of what this is from an oncologist, from maybe a naturopath, or I want I don't think you should dismiss somebody on this side, and yet there's a mistrust, right? And there's what I learned is there's a barrier that's a lot of times related to language, frequency, energy, vibrations, chakras. These are all things that are still somewhat nebulous in a way, and they're defined by different people in different ways. So no two people, I realize, agree on the same kind of definition for some of these things. It's much more like, oh, you'll feel it, you'll know it. Okay,
Mm.
well, how do we foster that? How do we come to that, right? And again, from my own personal experience, it took time. I'm a skeptic by nature. I'm very cynical. It's just the way I was trained to question everything and just poke holes in things first, and then kind of see maybe the value. And it's not a healthy way to look at things, but it has helped me to at least understand the issues that the medical community has, understand to some extent the issues that the holistic community has. And I draw from my own experience as a clinician who also speaks the language of a PhD. I ran a drug discovery lab at Mayo Clinic for many years. And so I got to understand, like, a lot of times it's a lack of communication or a mistrust that develops. So why not create a platform and start developing, just the forum, really, for people to come talk, even if you don't agree. You may not agree with anything I'm saying. At least we can walk away respecting one another, and then being open to one day may come across one like, hey, I know so and so person who leads a breath work, and maybe it's worth kind of connecting with that person if you're experiencing this issue and you don't want any medicine of any kind. Okay, well, there you go. So that was really the origin. That was kind of the genesis of how I created West Eastern, the purpose that I wanted to serve, and to serve as kind of a bedrock to foster communication and a sense of community between people that want the same thing. We all want the same thing, but have different approaches and are just kind of blindside or myopic, I should say, to our approach is the only approach.
Mm. I love that approach and that integration of both sides of the coin. And I personally am, my father is an anesthesiologist. My mom was an operating room nurse. And so I grew up very much everything that you need, go to the hospital. And as I personally became very woo woo, my approach has often been much more how can I stay away from the doctors as much as possible? But there was even back in May, I was sick for like the whole month and I had a respiratory infection. And I pulled out my Ayurveda book and I'm looking through it to be like, all right, what's the best Ayurvedic treatment? And even in there, it was like, you may need antibiotics. And I was like, shit. And I did. I needed 2 rounds of antibiotics and a steroid to get my asthma under control, and it was certainly Western medicine that came to the rescue despite all of my
Yeah.
Eastern approaches, and so I think really beginning to integrate those 2 concepts together is absolutely the future of wellness.
Yeah, you hit it right in the head, Barrett. That I don't see it any other way. I can't see it any other way anymore, at least. And especially with so many technological advances and where we are becoming much more merged with machines of sorts. You know, our
Mm,
iPhones literally make us cyborgs. If somebody from the past, 100 years ago, was to see us now with AirPods in and an Apple Watch and a Whoop and at some point one of these new glasses that have AR and stuff augmented, we're cyborgs.
mhm.
And we that's a completely different discussion as to what that's doing to us. But I feel like the way that medicine now, especially from what I'm seeing with younger physicians, doctors, nurses, scientists, they're realizing that there's a way that Western modern medicine has failed us, and no matter all the technology that we have come up with, there's still some fundamental things that we just can't figure out why they're not working. Mental health is one of them.
Mm.
And so for me, I've become much more conscious about social media. I've not actually been on social media for many years, and I'm starting to realize that okay,
Cool.
I know it was so good for me, but I'm realizing that okay, there's a value to it, and yet I have to be very cognizant of the way it's programmed. Right? There's an algorithm that drives everything for quick hits of dopamine and what I consume or what I like and how engaged I am with it. So I think what I'm getting at is that I can't see it any other way. And any students that I have, and I still have students that I mentor. Students are the future. I am not the future. This next generation of individuals being trained in today's schools, universities, um, and other areas of education through different institutes. Where it's much more specialized in something that they're learning on the holistic side of things. I think we all are starting to realize, like, okay, there's a way that we have to be able to take ancient wisdom and knowledge of people that came before us and that may not have suffered from the kinds of illnesses that we're suffering from or depression or anxiety in a way that we are, and be able to kind of dilute that wisdom and take it with some of the things that, again, with the antibiotics or whatever it is that on the western side of the fence. So yeah, that's where the way I'm approaching it is learn and then teach, to the next generation.
Mm. I love it. I love that, and especially I think a lot of the upcoming generations, they're part of this almost like new earth paradigm. They have had meditation be a word in their field pretty much their whole lives, and they are just much more aware of their own consciousness. Some of them, not all of them, some of them are much more involved in their phones and the things that are causing the depression and the mental health issues. But I find there's a large group of them that are really here to do important things and help get humanity back on track. Yeah.
Absolutely.
And so, for my listeners who would love to keep up with you, what is the best way to stay up with what you're doing? Where can they find out more about West Eastern Health?
Um, so yeah, I think a lot of people are on social media, and we do have an Instagram page, West Eastern Health. Certainly a website, westeasternhealth.com. Um, and that's probably the best way to get in touch with us right now. My team is really I can't do this without my team, so I will give all credit to them. They're fantastic, and along the lines of everything that we talked about today, from the diet component or certain fasts or certain tests, to kind of see exactly, okay, what's going on in my body. I don't feel right. It's affecting the way I think, or anything else, like that you think isn't exactly going right with your mental health. I believe my team and I have a solution for that. I think we can find something out.
I love that. Well, thank you so much for joining me today. It has been an absolute pleasure to dive in deeper with you, and I'm so excited to share Western health with the world and just that new approach to wellness. So, thank you so much for all the
Thank
work
you.
you're doing.
Thank you so much, Baron, and I really appreciate you taking the time to be able to host me and for me to be able to share some of these little nuggets of wisdom or truth that I've stumbled across or kind of bumped into and still learning. So thank you.
Thank you. Woohoo.